Okay, so first I have with us Dr. Christopher Bartlett. Dr. Christopher Bartlett is the head of international climate diplomacy for the government of Vanuatu. You want to raise your hand? There you go. So we know it's you. All right, fabulous. And then next to him, we have Dr. Payam Akavan, lead legal counsel for the Commission of Small Island States on Climate Justice and International Law, COSIS. Yeah. Next to him, we have Zachary Phillips, AOSIS Fellow, Crown Counsel at Attorney General Chambers, Antigua and Barbuda. And then we have Honorable Malcolm DeLacy, Vanuatu's Global Climate Diplomacy Lead, New York Mission. Yes. And then we have Paul Chikwana Paul. I know, I said I was just gonna, he asked me to just call him Paul. He's the communications coordinator of the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition. Fabulous. All right. So to just give us a little context before we get into the discussion. International law has been underutilized as an instrument to hold states responsible for climate-related harm, and that's changing. Over the past year, small island states are already experiencing some of the gravest impacts of climate breakdown, and we have taken strong steps towards securing climate justice through the use of international law. Soon after COP27, the United Nations General Assembly is expected to decide whether it will pass a resolution formally requesting an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on legal aspects of climate change. This proposal is being led by the government of Vanuatu, a Commonwealth member state and one of the world's most climate vulnerable countries. In parallel, the governments of Antigua and Barbuda, Tuvalu, last year established a new intergovernmental organization, the Commission of Small Island States on Climate Change and International Law, COSIS. COSIS has been given the mandate to promote and advance the application of the international law of the sea through the international courts and tribunals with the explicit goal of seeking legal redress for the impacts of the climate crisis. The Commission of Small Island States on Climate Change and International Law, COSIS, approves a plan of action for Antigua and Barbuda, and they are moving this forward. So we're going to open with a poetry performance, and that is going to be on video. And this is Audrey Brown Pereira. They're taking pictures of us in the water. She's an islander, and she's from Cook Islands, New Zealand. Her poem beautifully illustrates how the struggle for climate justice is about our dignity and identity as islanders.
They're taking pictures of us in the water. On the count of 1.5, smile, say cheese. They're taking pictures of us in the water like we are mermaid, wearing white coral and motherless plankton, quilted, illuminous, mysterious, not of this world. They post and share. Submerged, still life, just breathing, visible and muted. The sea just below our nose, inhaling water. Islands become mythology, tragedy, and self-rescue in the making, but no myth, no ruins or philosophers of brilliance. Modern-day man want, need, find, take, make, break, throw away and leave behind. Promissory notes in faraway chapeau of negotiated text and international law and science and diplomacy. And make-believe. So we doubt and forget. Make-believe modern-day man not responsible when he the only one eating at the table. Weather patterns changing, harvest times too. Sea become terrestrial, so terrestrial becomes sea. Cannibal-induced climate, climate-induced cannibalism. Ice cream elsewhere be melting. And the living and the sea getting so hot, so hot, so hot. They tired, they hungry, they can't say in front of them. They don't know yet. 30 million square kilometers of our blue Pacific. Brown and black and white and gray, birthing, breathing, being. We people, not a mermaid. We leading the charge for our own self-rescue. Without us, there is no memory of the beginning, middle, or the end. There is nothing. On the count of 1.5, smile. You're not smiling.
As islanders, we have a voice, we have creativity, and we have our minds, and we have to use that to our advantage. All right, so let's kick the discussion off. So what is the request for an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice? Malcolm, can you, may I?
Thank you very much, moderator, and very much delighted to be in the company of the esteemed panelists, and as well as to be joined by those of us that are interested in this very real and vital issue, especially where international law and climate change is concerned. And for Vanuatu, this advisory opinion is a way of us vulnerable states in asking to the highest court, especially with this greatest problem that humanity is facing in terms of the clarity and the need to strengthen international law as far as climate change and human rights is concerned. And we see the advisory opinion as providing the synergy, the clarity, and as well as pushing that envelope in ensuring that we have greater action in addressing the biggest problem that is facing humanity. So I think this, generally this is what we see as this advisory opinion will assist particularly climate vulnerable countries like Vanuatu and many in this event today, so that we can contribute and have our voices to the whole in addressing this whole problem. Thank you.
Wonderful, and thank you so much. What is the Commission on Small Island States? Hi.
I would also like to thank the Commonwealth Foundation for organizing this event, and to you for being our wonderful chair. And I will begin on the theme of gender balance, because the 14 members of the Committee of Legal Experts of the Commission of Small Island States have perfect gender balance, a very rare occurrence in the world of international law. But perhaps I can speak about why the Commission was established at COP26 by the Prime Ministers of Antigua and Barbuda and Tuvalu as a vehicle for collective legal action for small island states, building on the excellent efforts of Vanuatu to table a resolution at the General Assembly, which will, I understand, be happening imminently. And it's a common misunderstanding that the Commission has been created to seek an advisory opinion from that other tribunal called the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. That's not correct.
Oh, okay.
The Commission is there to represent the interests of all small island states, whether before the ICJ, ITLOS, or the many other means that there will be in the coming years to promote the progressive development of international law. International environmental law is now at what I call a Nuremberg moment. What the Second World War did for human rights and the revolutionization of international law, the current impending climate catastrophe is doing for international environmental law. The ICJ advisory opinion, the ITLOS advisory opinion, which will be in parallel with and complementary to that effort, should be seen only as the first steps in the transformation of international law. And I think it is incredible that the smallest of states are rising to the greatest of challenges, and all the major polluters, which are always lecturing others about a rule-oriented international order. Well, that's exactly what Vanuatu wants. That's exactly what Antigua and Tuvalu and Palau and Niue and the several other small island states that have indicated that they will join the Commission want. So just to conclude, in the coming months, there will be the ICJ advisory opinion. All signs are that it will pass with a majority in the General Assembly. Antigua and Barbuda and other members of the Commission are member of the core group, strongly supporting the General Assembly resolution, as are other climate vulnerable states such as Bangladesh, very key players. The Commission will go before ITLOS, which is a specialized tribunal under the law of the Sea Convention, which has specific expertise on protection of the marine environment. And these initiatives will both build on each other to ensure that small island states get the best possible results at the end of the day, because it's one thing to go before the court, it's another thing to get an advisory opinion that instead of being at 30,000 feet and engaging in abstract platitudes, sets forth obligations that are concrete and that will allow small island states in the COP process and elsewhere to speak about 1.5 degrees ocean acidification and other issues in very concrete terms.
Thank you so much. And I think I'm gonna ask you to delve a bit deeper into the power of that authority. And it's one thing to have it be practical, but the level of influence that opinion will have. I just realized I have not introduced myself. I am Raquel Moses. I'm the CEO of the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator. I'm also a UNFCCC Global Ambassador representing the Caribbean and all small island SIDS. And I'm the only one representing the Caribbean and small island SIDS. And so I'm pleased to be your moderator this evening. I think I'm just tired. It's been a long day. So please forgive me, especially to those of you online. But we'll continue with the discussion. All right, so the next question that I have is, how will these initiatives support and strengthen the delivery? Wait, 1 second. All right. What can these initiatives do to support each other? Can I ask you, Christopher? Yeah. Oh.
Great. Thank you very much for the question. Look, I think we're here in this process, which we've been engaged in for 30 years. And if you go to any of our small island developing states, you will see immediately that we have not achieved the goals or the intention of the UNFCCC or the Paris Agreement. And I think how these initiatives work together is to really bring not only clarity, but ambition to this process. We talk about raising ambition within NDCs. We talk about raising ambition within the negotiations, but we're stuck because we don't have clarity on how our international legal regime can actually bring to bear on this process. We keep talking about negotiating through things which in our view are already non-negotiable legal obligations. And I feel like if we can get clarity from the International Court of Justice, which is the world's highest court, which is the United Nations principal organ for clarifying legal issues, if we can get clarity from the tribunals that exist under international law, that when we come to negotiate, we will actually stop negotiating on areas which don't need further clarification, but get to the solutions that are required to protect our people and to protect human rights. And so international law contains so many treaties that all parties have already ratified. Whether you talk about the law of the sea, whether you talk about the Convention on the Rights of the Child, whether you look at the 2 convents on human rights or the Charter of the United Nations, if we can understand how those existing commitments, those existing obligations could be pulled together for coherent application of climate ambition, for coherent and consistent decisions on climate change, can you imagine where we would be today? Instead of still at COP27, 27 years after meeting, we haven't been able to figure out financial arrangements for loss and damage. We still haven't figured out a goal for adaptation. And this is where legal clarity, these initiatives and many others that are dealing with international law can actually bring some resolution to some of these questions that we've been asking since the 1990s.
Okay, great. And so can I ask the same question to you, Payam?
I uh, echo everything my friend Dr. Christopher has said. And really the question is, does international law have anything to say about the greatest challenge facing the very survival of humankind? And I think the answer has to be an emphatic yes. International law has very much to say. And I think what Christopher said is quite remarkable, because we're going backwards 50 years. The Stockholm Declaration at the first UN Environment Conference is from 1972. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea is from 1982. And the principles of international law on transboundary harm, the polluter pays principle, go back even further. They're 100 years old. So why have we carved out this huge exception about climate change? If a country comes and dumps toxic waste off the coast of another country, the principles are clear. You have to pay to clean it up. If you have a chimney that spews toxic fumes across the border into another state, you are causing harm for which you are liable. So why is it that when it comes to climate change, all of a sudden everyone says, well, the only way to address this is through discretionary, loose commitments, unilateral declarations which may or may not be fulfilled, as opposed to hard binding obligations. What my dear friend Christopher has said is fantastic, because it's blindingly obvious, and we need to make it part of the conversation at future COPs, because the small island states, certainly the prime ministers of Antigua and Tuvalu, when they at COP26 established the commission, they said, we've got nothing to lose. All we have had are empty promises, vague commitments. What do we have to lose by enlisting international law in support of our cause?
Very powerful. I feel like there are all sorts of forces at play and all kinds of possibilities to play out in the power dynamics that exist. But we have to try, right? We have to try. So I'm going to ask you, Zachary, how do these mechanisms help us to enforce the Paris Agreement and achieve the SDGs? Oh.
Thank you. Great. So I think, building off of what everyone has already said, I think something that all international negotiations tend to do for the purpose of efficiency, and I believe at the point of time that it's suggested, it is efficient. They try to silo different parts. So when we talk about mitigation, we only talk about mitigation. When we talk about adaptation, we only talk about adaptation. Finance is its own room, even though finance is supposed to be financing everything else. And I think even in international law, there is a bit of siloing happening as well. There is the Treaty on Climate Change, there's a Treaty on Law of the Sea, there are treaties on human rights. But for me, for you, for all of our viewers online, we exist in a world where all of these things affect us simultaneously, and they build on top of each other. So I think the silo effects, which I understand for the purpose of efficiency, we can't sit in a room and talk about the entire climate change agreement at once, but the silo effect is doing more harm than good. And I think initiatives like these, advisory opinions, where you can sit the court down or the tribunal or whatever it is and say, look at all these different silos, put them together and tell us, what does this mean for the individual? What does this mean for the country? What does this mean for climate vulnerable states? I think that's very important and very useful, especially at this stage where international law is I forgot the term that you use, where we're reaching a Nuremberg moment, where I completely agree, and I think it was poetically put, there is something that is going to change as a result of this. We're at a place where we can't continue doing the same thing. So I think at this point in time, the advisory opinions are very useful, very, very timely, and I think that is how they will assist with the interpretation and the explanation of international law on a real level.
Yeah. So let's bring in the people who this will impact the most. I'm going to ask Paul. How does this respond to what young people want to see coming out of climate action
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for this
and climate
amazing
justice?
opportunity to be here. Yes, like he said, when you have international law as a reference for most of what we do, then there is a sense of clarity, right? So there are some things that should not be negotiated. We should have very specific reference points from which you begin to negotiate, right? And I think, for example, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, when it was passed in 1982, um, the review by the World Ocean showed that it's kind of remained silent on greenhouse gas emission and climate change. But I mean, it's quite commendable that we've come to the point where we are now kind of pointing this to climate change, really maximizing those things and merging the silos, like he said. We are kind of, there are lots of things happening at the same time, but all are individualistic in themselves. And I think when we point back to international law itself and use that as the basis for conversation, even during negotiation, then I think we can begin to make progress that is kind of beyond the pace we are currently at now. And I think international law in itself is not abstract. It's not something we are trying to force into climate justice. Of course, there are some principles of international law that really is parallel. It makes so much sense to climate justice. For example, the right to no harm, for example, parties are obligated to not cause harm to other countries, right? There is like due diligence, there's aspects of precautionary principles. So I think, like he said, once again, it's now bringing those things that have always been there. I mean, it's quite sad that we've not come to the point of no return before we look back at those resources that have been there to really begin to merge them together to take action. So in summary, it's very crucial for climate justice. And I wouldn't want us to look at it as something that is innovative in itself. No, we've just come to the point of realization that these things have been there and we should begin to integrate them into conversations and have very clear references when we negotiate and come together as parties to talk about actions to address climate change and loss and damage. And also, just to conclude, there is an aspect of international law, for example, that is preventive, right? Which in a way supports more of adaptation than loss and damage. So, these are things we need to look at to see how best we can integrate those things that like I said, have always been there to really take actions to advance the call for climate action and also for climate justice. So that's my little contribution. Thank you.
Very, very powerful and meaningful. So I'm going to go back to Honorable Malcolm. What is it going to take then for us to get the UNGA resolution passed?
Yeah, thank you. We've for that particular resolution to go through, you would need a majority. Looking at 2/3, and one or two is very much as well as other countries that are friendly to the initiative has come out to advocate, and banded forces with the civil society, the academia, the youth, especially the youth, which this particular initiative stemmed from, and using all its diplomatic machinery to ensure that this will get across the line. So at this point in time, we have a core group of countries that are looking to fine-tune the resolution so that it'll go out to the general membership, and having the processes of the informals and the particular mechanisms by which the General Assembly utilizes. So at this juncture, I would also like to sort of commend and appreciate our countries that have been joined, banded together and collaborated with Vanuatu Antigua Barbuda, and with the PCIDs, we have Tuvalu, the Pacific family, as well as the ACP region countries that have joined forces to ensure that we'll get that into a successful outcome within the General Assembly.
Excellent. And just as a follow-up, and do you think that the Commonwealth and the Commonwealth Foundation has a role to play in sort of canvassing support for this initiative?
Absolutely, absolutely. Commonwealth, in terms of its network and the fantastic work and program that has been doing, will very much harmonize and synergize with this whole campaign. We're looking forward to, once it goes through the General Assembly vote, then they're actually getting into the nitty-gritty of getting that advisory opinion from the ICJ, and that would definitely require Commonwealth Foundation's support.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so what are the next steps for COSIS?
Well, the next steps for COSIS are, first and foremost, to increase its membership. The co-chairs have called on all small island states to join forces. And small island states, more than any other group of states, have to join forces in order to address the gross power imbalance, which has put them in this situation in the first place. But moving forward, COSIS has endorsed the ICJ advisory opinion, and its committee of legal experts is at the disposal of all small island states who would wish to participate in that process, free of charge, which doesn't happen often with lawyers. And at the same time, in parallel, ITLOS will soon proceed with a request for an advisory opinion from ITLOS. And it must be remembered that the Law of the Sea Convention was adopted 10 years before the UNFCCC. Part 12 of that convention has a very robust regime which, beyond the general principle of transboundary harm, obligates states to take affirmative actions to preserve and protect the marine environment. It's a very exacting obligation. And ITLOS also is a tribunal which is very receptive to scientific evidence. It tends to be more technical and less political than some other courts. So the hope is that ITLOS will provide a robust opinion as a first step towards the successive steps which small island states will take through the ICJ and other mechanisms in the years ahead. And once again, I emphasize, this isn't just about the ICJ or ITLOS in the next year or two. This is the opening chapter in a historic struggle over the coming decades. So we hope COSIS will become that unifying vehicle for collective legal action for small island states, in concert with the excellent initiative of Vanuatu.
Wonderful. And speaking of Vanuatu, so you guys are used to punching well above your weight and, getting in fights that are disproportionate. What are some of the barriers that you are likely to face? And because I feel like what you focus on manifests and multiplies, what are some unlikely allies that you are likely to have along the way?
Yeah, look, Vanuatu is one of the smallest and most vulnerable nations on the planet. And I would like to acknowledge the fact that we've got the Director General of the Ministry of Climate Change here with us today. And what she has done as, first of all, one of the only female Director Generals in climate change around the world. But what she has done is really set the standard about what ambition means. Not only did she lead the revision and enhancement of the nationally determined contribution, which only, I understand, 27 or 29 countries actually abided by that commitment of the Glasgow Pact, which put human rights and people at the center of climate decision-making. She has also presided over the institutional reform, which brings together not only climate change, but also disaster risk reduction and Prime Minister's Office high-level policymaking. So really putting climate change into an actionable space at the governance level. I think Vanuatu has also kind of stood out in the international community by being the first country to call on the International Criminal Court, which is a different court, to criminalize the crime of ecocide. Also, we are clearly having discussions right now about the need to bring, this clarity to international law. So there is a lot of pushback that we have already experienced. The first time that the ICJ was discussed in the context of climate change came from the Pacific. And due to the extreme pressure from developed high emitting countries, they withdrew that initiative. And Vanuatu has said unequivocally that we will not be pressured, that we have nothing more to lose. Climate change is so existential and undermining the very fundamental human rights of our population that we must progress at all costs. And so I think it's only natural that a country like Vanuatu stands up and speaks on behalf of those who maybe can't speak. And this is why I think we've had such incredible support from around the world. I mean, it was first the leaders of the Caribbean that endorsed this pathway and said, absolutely. Soon after, the Organization of Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific, and the leaders of the Pacific. It's now being endorsed by the elders' voice, the elders themselves. I mean, it has now truly become a global campaign for climate justice, which will not be stopped, which will pass through the General Assembly, and which will deliver one of the most powerful advisory opinions on climate justice the world has ever seen.
All right, I believe you. And who are some unlikely allies?
Yeah, I mean, we are so honored that it's not just the developing vulnerable nations that have put together what is now, as of yesterday, the zero draft resolution. We have had the incredible support of some of the most important economies in the world. Our core team, our core group, includes the likes of Germany, of Portugal, of Romania, of Liechtenstein, leaders like Costa Rica, leaders in Africa, Uganda, Mozambique, I mean, Bangladesh. These are the climate champions, and they have banded together not only to show solidarity, but to bring their own legal expertise and their own perspectives of this climate clarification of international law to make sure that that question is unassailable, cannot be questioned, and will be answered to the best of the International Court of Justice's ability.
Zach, I want you to weigh in on the same thing. Some of the challenges, and talk to us a little bit about the power dynamics, because I think, in the Caribbean we have been through it where, there's an unfair rule, there's an unfair law, and we're fighting ahead, and then you see them divide and conquer, or somebody has debt, and well, here's some concessionary finance, and things start to move and change and play, and people have to make practical decisions, unfortunately. So what do you see as some of the barriers? What do you see as the power dynamics? And what do you see as some of the unlikely allies in this fight?
Well, everything that's been said is very, very accurate. I would also like to say I appreciate the government of Vanuatu because I am representing Antigua and Barbuda on that core group. So it has been great to see this developed countries from around the world, different continents, all coming together on this idea that there needs to be a question to clarify something that we can all see very, very plainly. I would say further that I think while there may be barriers, I don't think that the barriers are as high or as strong as other people may put it. I do think that there is a wave. There's a wave that is being ridden. There's a wave that unfortunately has started. I believe the epicenter of the wave is in fact destruction or despair that is starting from small islands, but our despair is rocking the ocean and has created a wave that we will now ride all the way to the ICJ. I do think though that as it relates to the power dynamics, that is a very, very important question. And you've raised some of those issues in your prelude to me. There have been situations where we as small island states have to make practical decisions as to whether or not we pursue something that we know is important, or we literally feed the people that we need to feed. But what I can say and agree with Chris on this point is that at this stage it is existential. If nothing is done soon, there is nothing more that can be done. So I don't foresee any cogs in the wheel. I don't foresee any major disturbances. And I think at this point in time, the way that the globe is looking to see what is the response that can be done for the most vulnerable, if there is any opposition, wherever that opposition comes from, will have a lot of answering to do.
So speaking of answering you know, existential and all of these things, the young people, how does this support, how does what the young people are already involved in support this effort? And what more support can you provide to this effort going forward?
Okay. So I think I would draw significantly from my experience as someone um who who in a way tries to communicate loss and damage, which of course within the UNFCCC there is still some, like, I mean, that's where you should have the most experienced people when it comes to definitions and the rest, but that consensual understanding or agreement on definitions, it's not really there, right? So, but I think it's recently we're now coming to a consensus on what these definitions mean. I think the young people historically or recently have kind of played a significant role in breaking these things down, or to really fast tracking the process of getting most people on board, right? So the um, international law or whatever it is there might take so much time to really diffuse into the society to ensure that we have that coherent participation from relevant stakeholders, right? But the youth have accelerated other processes. For example, loss and damage. You see, there are lots of people or lots of young people now saying we want loss and damage. And when you engage in conversations, you see that this comes from a standpoint of understanding. There is now a gradual clarity on what these definitions are. And I mean, you can't really talk about what you don't understand, right? So we've accelerated the process, getting climate education to even the most vulnerable, coming up with innovative ways to really get most people on board, right? So I believe we can also play a role in this as well, because it's like a journey, right? Like I said, in 1982, the review I saw when the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea was passed, there was a silence on climate change. But now we're getting to that point where we're not pointing to actions or international law on climate change, and then we're like reflecting on that convention on stuff like that, right? So we are on a journey, and I believe that without the youths, the whole process of getting the majority on board would not really be fast-tracked, and we play an active role in that. So I think that's where the youths come in, significantly joined from my experience in the climate change space, and also what we've done within a short period of time, and when it comes to getting the masses on board, when it comes to loss and damage. So I think that's a role we can play as youths and where we come in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. So and this is just open, what support, well, certainly for Vanuatu and for COSIS, what support does Vanuatu and COSIS require? And why is it important? How can we support this effort? Yeah, maybe come down the line.
Okay, great. Look, I think one of the biggest misconceptions of this initiative is that somehow we are trying to attack or extract from the rich, high-emitting nations. And that is absolutely not the intention of this initiative. I need to repeat, this is about clarity that helps us all. And I think when the resolution is released to the public next week, that it's going to be very important that we help all partners understand and interpret the question in that spirit of let's help each other so that we can help ourselves. The advisory opinion will be useful to all nations. Vanuatu, we know that we have not fully met our obligations under international law as regards climate change. How can we improve our own commitments to protecting people, protecting children and women and human rights and sustainable development. And I think we need civil society, particularly, to get involved in this process, not only in helping to craft the advisory opinion by making submissions to the court, but also once the advisory opinion comes out, to help governments improve their own obligations, meeting their own obligations. And I think right now is this critical time when we are going to the vote and where we need not just the vulnerable, we need not just the members of the core group and not just the members of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific who've endorsed, but we need to see this global wave truly come at the General Assembly. I want to see every UN member state press that green button to say, we stand up for human rights and climate change. Because whoever doesn't, they are going to be very much questioned. And they will absolutely have to answer why you don't want clarity to protect people from this climate crisis. So that's what we need from all people in all nations, is to make sure that governments push that green button.
I will once again echo the wonderful words of my colleague by saying that, we speak about global warming being the common concern of humanity. Well, let's accept what that means. That means that what the small island states are doing are also in the interest of the major polluters, because what's happening to the small island states today is going to happen to them tomorrow. So in a sense,
It's happening to them now.
you're right. It will. The truly catastrophic dimensions perhaps are felt by small island states in ways that are not yet felt by the major polluters,
Not
but
on
they
the
certainly
scale.
will.
Yeah.
And my brother Zachary from Antigua will know what happened to Barbuda in 2017. Completely destroyed. Everyone had to be evacuated. You speak to the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, who with sadness says that my people have to evacuate their islands in the next generation. The entire population of this country will have to leave. And the president of Palau put it very well at COP26. He says, you may as well bomb us.
Yeah.
This was what President Whips Jr. said. So this is not about, a melodrama. These are the realities faced by those on the front lines of climate catastrophe. And I think it's very important to understand, as our brother said, that this is not an academic exercise. International law is an abstraction. There are people's lives that are being destroyed. There are people whose homes are being submerged.
Yeah.
But just to conclude, I would say in terms of what people can do to assist COSIS, and I think by extension to assist the Vanuatu initiative, is for small island states to join, to band together, to show the world that they speak with one unified voice in an institution which is also capable of giving them legal assistance given the resource constraints.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to get before the ICJ or ITLOS. It's another thing to have the resources for small island states to vigorously put forward, not just as at the level of abstractions of, yes, harming the environment is a bad thing. We know that already. But to get into concrete questions, 1.5 degrees, ocean acidification, extreme weather events, what are the specific obligations that states have as we move forward? Because I don't think the major polluters have an idea with abstract principles at 30,000 feet. The devil is in the detail, and that's where we really need to go as we move forward.
So I'm gonna ask Honorable Malcolm to take that same question as to how can we support Vanuatu? But I'm gonna ask Zachary a different question. So
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Climate change is something that impacts everyone in all walks of life, regardless if you're in one of the climate vulnerable countries or in the developed countries. We're seeing actual impacts. I'm mostly based in New York in the UN mission, and for the life of me, I didn't think that something like the hurricane that devastated Florida. I mean, that sort of brought memories similar to what devastating impacts with Vanuatu or any other small island developing state. So it's something that would require all hands on deck across all spheres of governance and stakeholders banding together to address this. So very much would ask, all other small island states, all other developing countries, and even developed countries to support this, because at the heart of this whole climate change issue is people, and that's what boils down to it, is preserving the human dignity against the devastating impacts of climate change.
It's almost as though you read my mind about the question that I was about to ask, Zachary.
I'm
So,
ready.
so, at the end of the day, this is about people. It's about people who will be making the decision, people that we will be communicating to, young people who will see this messaging and take action. How do we get that, when the last panel that I moderated that you were on, you had some very powerful stories about just how real and tactile this is. And for some of us, as you're saying, it's very, very real. We've seen it, we've lived it, we've been in it, we've been frightened by it. Whenever rain starts to fall, we're a little antsy because we're not sure what happens next. And some of the people who are making some of these decisions aren't in that, they don't have that same lived experience. How do we communicate in a way to get them to understand? Because, people talk about International Court of Justice and the UNFCCC. I'm like, it's just people. It's not some sentient body that says, well, here, I now preside over you and decide. No, it's individual people who are making these decisions. And we have to find ways of connecting with those people.
Right. So tying into the last question, to answer this one, what came to my mind is the support that we need is really empathy. And as you rightly said, a lot of people, if you've never experienced a hurricane, a regular hurricane, not even one of the 2022 hurricanes. If you've never experienced a regular hurricane, you have no idea what we're speaking of. If you've never experienced the joy of knowing that you have ancestral grounds that are next to the ocean, that you, your parents, your grandparents, entire families have been buried there, and that has been your home, and you know it's going to be gone, that you can't translate that to someone else. And I think the support that we do need really and truly is a sense of empathy from people around the world, because the closest experience that I give when I try to explain it to persons is when the COVID pandemic hits and borders started closing. People were at school in different universities around the world. People were working away from home, and they just got a phone call or a notice that said, the border is closed and you cannot return home. And that line is a different feeling. You may not have wanted to go home, but just knowing that you cannot go back does something to you. And then immediately after, I asked the question, can you imagine if your country was completely gone? It wasn't a temporary border closure. It was just the extinction of your home. And people think that we're being dramatic with these discussions. As stated, Hurricane Irma hit one of our sister islands, Barbuda. 98% of infrastructure was destroyed when that hurricane passed. And not 98% was affected or damaged. 98% was destroyed. So can you imagine in the islands, we do get storms often. So we anticipate, we know that a storm is coming, we know how to defend, but you can't defend for something that destroys 98%. And then on top of that, that catastrophic event is something that is getting stronger every year and is due to no fault of any of the actions in your country. SIDS only contribute to 0.02% of global emissions. So it's nothing that we are doing that is causing this, but we are the ones who are living with it. There are more high profile damaging events that have happened in recent years, but SIDS have been dealing with it for a while. And that is why, that's the main reason that we're trying to do everything that we can. We're trying to galvanize these initiatives to see if we can get the support that we need, because we are experiencing, we are surviving and trying to do it on our own. And using our own already vulnerable situation to just live with. It really is that situation. And don't take it that because we are able to continue fighting at COP, it means that we're not facing it back home. We are struggling. There are severe challenges, and that is all the more motivation to come to venues like this, to go to venues like the ICJ, to have initiatives like ITLOS, because we need some sort of support, and international law is there to protect people. And that's what we're trying to galvanize around.
All right, and we have a great question in from the audience about international tribunals. So a good segue to that question. And this is from Jamul Francis, who's online. International tribunals will require sufficient information and evidence to establish the necessary factual background and determine the application of relevant international law. As such, how are process and the community of climate change scientists going to work together to overcome this evidential burden?
It's a very good question, and I can only answer it in the abstract because one of the aspects of litigation always is to keep confidential matters until they are actually pleaded in court. But certainly, scientific evidence will be a central part of submissions to the court. And ITLOS in particular, because it's a specialized body, is very receptive to scientific evidence. And we hope in due course to submit evidence. And we also have to remember that the oceans are by far the biggest carbon sink in the world, absorbing some 96% of global warming. And small island states, because they're in the middle of oceans, understand more than anyone else the consequences of extreme weather events, ocean acidification, loss of marine biodiversity. So ITLOS is very promising in addressing at a very technical, scientific, non-politicized level the questions that I addressed of pH balance and what have you. So in answer to the great question from the audience, yes, scientific evidence will certainly be put before the tribunal.
Yeah, and the nice thing about it is that we've had, and I appreciate they're talking about a particular level of evidential burden, but we've had evidence upon evidence upon evidence and science upon science upon science. So it isn't, I think that there is a big movement of support that will help us in getting to that point. All right, so now we will get to closing remarks, I believe. Yes. Oh no, two more good questions have come in. All right. So the next really good question. Oh, they want to take questions live from the audience. All right. So do we have any live questions from the audience? Anyone live want to ask any questions? Don't be, yes, gentleman in that. Yeah, hearing you. Oh, nice. Yeah. There you go.
I feel sad a little bit because all these empty chairs should be filled by Pacific Island small island development states. I thank our colleagues from Vanuatu. Madam, thank you so much. This is something that needs, I think there is clarity, Chris. I think for us, the question is, what is the challenge now for us to amplify this so that we can create this flood, not of empathy. This is the real thing. This is the crossroad of international law. I perfectly be here because I am a strong supporter of ICJ in the Pacific. I fully understand, my dear sir, that my government is mum in this, but there are some who fully understand this and the need for clarity for this. My question to the sir, what is the plan now for us to really cascade this up, across, and down so that we can get the real commitment from all, not only small island development states, but oasis and beyond. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Uh, who'd like to take it? So what his question is specifically, he's in great support of the initiative. What is needed now to amplify what we're doing? And I'm saying we because I'm in on it now. You know, hook, line, and sinker. I am in. But what is needed from us to amplify so that we can get it not just the small island states, above, beside, below, we can get everyone. What is our communication plan? What is our communication strategy to make sure that this message can be amplified? Because, you know, I get what you're saying. Once you hear it, you're like, this makes sense. This makes sense. There is nothing else that requires greater sort of convincing, you know? But the message has to reach the people in order for them to say I'm on board. So what can we do? Maybe we ask Paul because, you know, you young people are very networked and quite well communicating. What do we need to do to amplify this message?
Apparently, I think his question kind of was in sync with what I had in mind, right? Because while you asked the question before this, I wanted to ask him because like it was, how do we support them? But I think the question should be the other way around. What do you think you need to move this forward, right? Because like we can draw from the experiences. I mean, let me use an anecdote to really clarify this. 2 days ago, we're having like a dinner with Dr. Salim, who is one of the forefronts of loss and damage, you know, and one key theme that emerged from the conversation is for us to move forward, we need to really learn from what we've done in the past, right? An example could be when we talk about loss and damage finance, and after all these decades of experience, we now set up a facility that is like GCF. That means we've not been learning, right? That means all these experiences were not put into practical use. So that's why the way forward for loss and damage finance is really a dynamic structure that's not a replication of what we've had when we talked about financing, adaptation, and mitigation. So when you put this in parallel to the conversation here, I think for them or for this implementation to really be effective, there needs to be clarity on the specifics that's needed, right? So before you call in member states in large numbers, because it wouldn't make sense if you have 193 people putting their signature to something, but at the end of the day, there is no structural framework that allows flexibility to accelerate implementation. And then we still have that repetition of what we have at the UNFCCC, where there's so many people coming together, but at the end of the day, nothing is translated into action. So from the end of the parties who are putting this forward to the world, there needs to be clarity and specifics, right? There needs to be simplification of what the acts are. It shouldn't be blurry. When I look at this, like I can literally see what's needed to move this from what it is now to the next phase. And it shouldn't be asking for more member states to come and be a part of this. So I think for them, or for the proponents, those who are leading this at the forefront, there needs to be clarity, simplified acts that whosoever is interested in the conversation can really see that this is where I come in and this is how we move this initiative from what it is now to the next phase. I think that's my little contribution to that.
All right. Yeah.
Well, I think getting back to Vanuatu's excellent initiative, it's something which began with the students in the South Pacific, and that's the wonderful thing about this story. It has grassroots, and the government's initiative is supported by civil society, and that is becoming increasingly a global movement, and it has to expand even further. As I said, getting the General Assembly resolution passed, getting before ITLOS is just the first step. It's a big step, but it's just the beginning of the show. And what follows afterwards will be many challenges ahead. So I think as I'm a law professor, so we get excited about jurisprudence and all of these things. but I'm much more excited about social movements, political movements, which have deep roots in society. And at the end of the day, international law in the abstract isn't going to change anything unless it is embraced by the masses. And I will say international law is a very elitist business, which went back to what I said earlier about having gender diversity, having the global south represented, having the council and advocates themselves being representative of this broader community. So how do we move forward and give this even greater resonance? The great, excellent question that you asked. We expand the global society movement and we send the message to the major polluters. As my dear friend Chris said, we're not against you. We're here to save you from yourselves because you're driving over the bloody cliff. So I think the message has to be on the right side of history, because people will look back 5 years, 10 years, 50 years from now, and they will see which were the leaders who understood the catastrophe that lies around the corner for all of us and which ones didn't. And I'm confident that history is on the side of the small island states, the climate vulnerable states that are championing this cause. We just need to steam ahead and not be discouraged by all the criticisms and attempts to undermine this. It will succeed.
All right. Well, I'm going to check and see if there are any more questions from the audience. No? All right. So I'm going to go to the next online question, if that's all right. All right. So the next online question is, from Wajita Joseph, which metrics are being put in place to project the efficacy of the initiatives being undertaken? And is it possible to estimate, my favorite part, the actual timeline needed to undertake each initiative?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I really don't know. It might take 1 to 2 years, but it's basically very much dependent on how we can galvanize the support, the submissions that is required to make it to the ICJ, and meet the standards, the asks that the ICJ brings. So I would at a guess 1 to 2 years, but that's my best guess.
Okay. Yep. It would
No, I
seem.
think our distinguished representative from Vanuatu said it correctly. It's very difficult because it's a question of how busy the court's docket is. And there are multiple cases. In the case of ITLOS, it's less of an issue because it has a relatively light docket, not so the ICJ. There's also another advisory opinion that will be requested in respect of Palestine. And there are a number of pending cases. But typically, it would probably be sometime in 2024 that a hearing would be held. There would be a huge amount of interest, many states intervening, which is a good thing, but it also delays things a bit further because those states will need time to put together their submissions. And it's likely that ITLOS would deliver an advisory opinion more quickly, which may be perfect because the ICJ's jurisprudence would then be informed in respect of the law of the sea by the opinion of ITLOS, and that would hopefully encourage the ICJ to go in the right direction.
So I'm going to ask something. Maybe this is the audience saving me from myself, because I had another. Oh, here's another. Another question. All right. Yes, because I was going to ask you, and I know this is being recorded, so maybe in terms of ITLOS and the International Court of Justice, how would you, and answer as diplomatically as you like, how would you rate sort of the effectiveness of getting a decision from either?
Well, I'm eager to see what our colleagues have to say as well. I would be very brief. I think each international court and tribunal has been created by the international community for a purpose. So the ICJ is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, as my friend Christopher said, ITLOS is a specialized tribunal focusing on law of the sea, and each of those jurisdictions has its own characteristics in terms of the quality of their jurisprudence, in terms of how they approach international law, some more cautious, some more progressive, and I don't care to opine more specifically on that, but it is with very careful aforethought that these issues have been considered and consulted upon by all the relevant actors, and we will see how it will play out hopefully in the coming months.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in? I didn't think so. All right, I've got a really another great question from the audience. What are the thoughts of the panelists in having COSIS also join in the movement to make ecocide international law? And this is from Nisha Abiraj.
I'll be very brief. COSIS is 1 year old. It just celebrated its first birthday, October 31st. And as I said, I think in the coming months, several more small island states will join. So the ICJ and ITLOS are just two initiatives. There's the Ecocide initiative. There's the initiative on the work of the International Law Commission on rising sea levels. I think small island states must struggle on multiple fronts in order to move international law forward in the direction that they want. And Ecocide could very well be one aspect of a wider strategy.
All right. And so I'm going to start with Paul for closing remarks. And it is for each of you to have one big ask from the people who are listening, from the people who listen to this recording, from the people in the audience. One big ask in your final remarks. How can we get this going?
Okay. I think I would also draw significantly from what I also say when the conversation is on loss and damage. And that's, we should put on our thinking hats, right? It's so sad that every time we come together, we always want to go back to the very beginning, right? So within the context of this conversation as well, could we draw significantly from the lessons learned in the past and ensure that we put it into what we're discussing right now to have accelerated progress in achieving the goals we set out to achieve? Because that's just the sad reality. And I'm saying this relative to my expectations at COP27 for the loss and damage finance facility. And I think it's also relevant in the context of this conversation as well, since it's in the process of really setting up something that could really bring us to the point where we take actions to address climate change significantly. So it's been decades of taking actions. It's been decades of bringing parties together, getting signatories. I think it's high time we look at what we have done in the past and then ensure that we're not really going back to level zero in this initiative as well, and take actions leveraging the lessons learned. So that's my kind of key message to everyone, both on the panel, those here, and also those listening. Draw significantly from the lessons learned. There's no point going back to level zero. And when we do so, we'll have accelerated progress. Thank you.
Brilliant. Put on our thinking hearts. I will never forget that. I love it. I want to put that on a tattoo and I don't have any. Oh, put on our thinking hearts. I should have let you go last. I'm kidding. Right? Honorable Malcolm.
Yeah, my simple ask is, get your governments on board to support the initiative, or join in a network to elevate the voices, the pressure from the bottom up, and especially in ensuring that there's participation in the process when it gets forward, and especially continue to advocate where issues of climate change and human rights, because it's very much people-centered, is concerned. Thank you.
All right.
I think building on the comment that I made that we tend to leave things in silos, my closing remark will be stop operating in silos. Because in the same way that the climate system, international law is separated into this part is here and that part is there, our own actions as people, we don't think about how simple things as leaving the lights on or the AC on during the day so that when we come home, our place is warm or cool, depending on where we live in the world. That has ramifications that lead to something else. So I think the broader picture is remove the silos, think about your actions holistically, think about not even at the high level of government decisions. Not all of us are prime ministers or diplomats, but you know, the regular folk at home, you also have a part to play. So remove those silos and act holistically towards a better world.
Okay, great. Karen?
I will just echo the words of the Honorable Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda and Tuvalu, who at the beginning of COP26 and now COP27 have invited small island states to join forces to struggle on several fronts: ICJ, ITLOS, ILC, ECOSIDE, and many other spaces that will open in the coming years, because we don't know where things will go, except that we know climate change will become worse. And hopefully the small island states will go down in history as I said, the smallest of nations who rose to the greatest of challenges and saved not just themselves, but also the major polluters from self-destruction.
Chris?
Great. Maybe I will just recall that this whole initiative is due to the foresight and the ambition of young people. And this entire panel is sitting here because of the work of young Pacific Islanders. And they are absolutely going to change the world. And if ever you thought that this system isn't working, then you can get in there and change it. You've convinced the government of Vanuatu, and you've convinced 86 plus other nations to listen to your ideas about how to make a better planet. And so congratulations to young people. Keep doing that. That is going to transform the system.
Fabulous, and thank you so much. Amazing. And if I am being allowed one big ask, if you are listening, if you are here, tell 3 people that don't know. There, you know, if each of us tells and ask each of them to tell 3 people that don't know, and that way we just create a wave. I mean, we're islanders, we understand waves. Let's create a wave. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for hanging on. And you can continue the conversation by joining the Commonwealth Foundation's digital discussion platform. And that's going to be a key place to go as well for information about what's happening with this initiative, to connect with the organizations here, to find out what you can do in your communities and how to advance this initiative forward. This is an innovative online discussion space for activists, practitioners. As we're talking about, this is about young people, and young people are doing it and making a difference. It's for artists and civil society leaders to network, share ideas, build solidarity around issues like these and others. And I really, really encourage you to join. Thank you so much for being with us today, and goodbye.